Good morning and early afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us. My name's Imani Rupert Gordon. My pronouns are she, her, and hers, and I'm the Executive Director for the National Center for Lesbian Rights. Thank you so much for joining us today. You're at A Changing Landscape, preparing for a Biden administration. Today, we're going to be talking about what we're looking forward to in this new administration. We want to talk about what we think this administration can do to better support LGBTQ people and what we can do as individuals and within organizations to get the outcomes that we want to support LGBTQ people. We have a fantastic panel for you today, and I'm going to introduce them in just a moment. I'm sure most of you know, but Nclr, we are a legal organization and we're committed to achieving the civil and human rights to all LGBTQ people and our families. We do this through litigation, legislation, public policy, and community education. We take a multi-pronged approach because it's important that we find the best way to support everyone in our community. And we know that sometimes the solutions are through litigation, other times there's through public policy and education. And so we value them and engage in all of them. Nclr, like so many of you, I'm sure, have spent the last couple of months anticipating what we think we will be able to accomplish under a Biden-Harris administration. We're trying to be as thoughtful as possible about providing the most effective and strategic ways to support LGBTQ folks. It seems that every day that we look up, the landscape is a bit different. The events over the last few weeks have been scary, and news outlets, as news continues to break, there's some days that I'm texting our legal director and our comms director asking if they've seen whatever we're watching at that moment. And some days I know that it feels like we're on pins and needles, but there's been a shift in the landscape, and some of that has had some good spots as well. President-elect Biden was the first to mention gay and transgender people in his victory address. This is huge, and it's a signal to us that our community won't be an afterthought in this administration. President-elect Biden has also made commitments to roll back some of the cruel and horrible policy that's left over from the Trump administration that's been extraordinarily anti-LGBTQ. And additionally, with everything that we've gone through over the past 3 weeks, we haven't got to spend as much time as we normally would have to talk about the Senate election in Georgia a couple of weeks ago. Now, we're a 501c3, so I want to be clear. I'm not talking about a partisan victory, but I'm talking about the fact that Warnock and Ossoff both campaign on a platform of LGBTQ equality, and they flipped seats in Georgia. Not only does this mean that there might be an opportunity to pass some pro-LGBTQ legislation, but it should tell us that we are perhaps living in a different time. People that don't identify as LGBTQ actively campaigning in a high-stakes election to support our community. In many ways, this feels like a new day. And this is exciting for us at Nclr because one of the things that you know very well about us is that we work really hard to fill gaps and to find ways to support the most underrepresented in our community. So when Nclr says that we support all of us, we mean all of us. And to do that, sometimes we have to do our work a bit differently. One of my favorite things about Nclr is that not only are we of the most progressive, working to include more people in our tent, but we also work to build bridges and work with folks that don't yet think like us. You see, for us, the work, at least in part, is changing hearts and minds, not just getting wins with no regard for how long they'll last, but we actually want to know that the work that we're doing is building a bench. We want to know that the work that we're doing is helping to get folks out there that are going to continue to fight for us even when we aren't in the room. Because that's how we start to see candidates in high-stake elections identifying and working for our community. So one of the things we're going to do is concentrate our efforts on working within agencies and working within other movements. We know that every issue is an LGBTQ issue, and so we act like it. We work closely with our LGBTQ partner organizations, but not exclusively. I remind our team all the time that we have the greatest value when we're the LGBTQ voice in the room. And that's true for both the room that we're in and for us. We're able to provide an LGBTQ perspective to movements that want to be inclusive, but maybe aren't prioritizing LGBTQ people. And it allows Nclr to be in rooms that have an LGBTQ perspective that hasn't been considered before. It's exactly this type of strategy that helped us develop Rural Pride. This started because we had a relationship with someone at USDA. And we said that LGBTQ people that live in rural parts of the country don't have access to Pride. So we partner with agencies to prioritize LGBTQ specific discussions in rural parts of the country. And we still host that program every year. So we want to concentrate our efforts on bridge building, coalition work, and finding ways to make inroads other than discrimination legislation. It's not that it's not important, it's just that our movement has that really well covered. So we can provide the greatest value by adding what's missing, what's missing in LGBTQ angles in arenas that have previously been left out. In just a few minutes, you're going to hear from some of the panelists who are going to share what they're working on, what their priorities are, and their areas of expertise. And that said, I'd like to introduce our brilliant panelists. The first is Julie Gonen, Policy Director at Nclr. Next, we have Tyrone Hanley, Senior Policy Counsel at Nclr and co-founder of the LGBTQ Anti-Poverty Network. Next, we're joined by Shannon Minter, Legal Director at Nclr. And finally, we're joined by our esteemed guest panelists today, Reggie Greer. Reggie is the LGBTQ Vote Director for Biden for President and has some insight about the Biden-Harris administration and LGBTQ priorities. I'm excited to start talking to our panelists today, but I wanted to take a moment before we started to honor our community, and that means all of us. Over the past year, we've been living through a global pandemic, and sadly, not all of us have made it. As of today, we've had 400,000 COVID-related deaths in this country, meaning this country has had more deaths than any other country on the planet. And so today, the panelists have all worn red in solidarity, but I'd like to offer a moment of silence for those who haven't made it with us. So please join me for a moment of solidarity, honoring everyone that we lost during this horrible pandemic. Thank you. So let's get started. First, please go around to our panelists and give us a quick introduction. Say your name, your pronouns, and talk about your area of scope or scope of work or interest. Julie, let's start with you.
Thanks, Imani. Good morning and good afternoon, everybody. I'm Julie Gonen. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the policy director here at Nclr. The majority of the work that I do is right at the intersection of reproductive health rights and justice and LGBTQ equality and liberation. While those are sometimes seen as two distinct movements, I actually think of them as sort of two overlapping circles in a Venn diagram because we have so very much in common. I also work on health policy issues more broadly, in part because those issues really do kind of cut across those different movements. I used to be a healthcare lawyer, and when I left private practice to move into public interest work, I said I wanted to work on either LGBTQ issues or reproductive health rights and justice issues, and clearly I have my dream job here because I get to do both.
Tyrone, what about you?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm so grateful for everyone who's joining us today. Again, my name is Tyrone, and I use he and him pronouns. So I work on issues such as criminal justice reform and economic justice because, we know, unfortunately, that LGBTQ people are more likely to be living in poverty and to be put into the criminal legal system. And so, we understand that in order to address the violence and discrimination in the lives of LGBTQ people, we need to be addressing these issues as well. And for me, particularly the issue of poverty is really personal. I'm someone who grew up low income and relied on many important social safety net programs. And so I know how important they are for LGBTQ families across the country. And so really spend time trying to advocate for these programs, but also for the communities that are impacted by these systems. So thanks again for everyone joining us.
Thanks so much, Tyrone. Shannon, if you could please introduce yourself.
Hey everybody, my name is Shannon Minter. I use he, him pronouns. It's so awesome to be here today with my colleagues who I love working with so much. And Reggie is so great. Thank you for making time to do this with us. Let's see, I am the legal director at Nclr, and that just means I oversee all of our litigation and policy work, whether it's the challenging the transgender military ban to the transgender youth project, sports project, advocating for LGBTQ people who are incarcerated, our family law work, the wonderful work that Tyrone is doing around criminal justice and economic reform. Anyhow, I've been here 27 years, and it's just a pleasure and an honor to work for such a great organization.
Thanks so much, Shannon. And Reggie, please introduce yourself. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Imani, for inviting me, and it's good to be with Tyrone, Shannon, and Julie, and in any space. I, have been fortunate enough to be in the LGBTQ advocacy space for a few years now, and even before joining the Biden campaign, leaning on Julie and Shannon and Tyrone and your expertise, Imani, is something that has been it meant a great deal to me. I on the Biden campaign, led the LGBTQ plus portfolio, and post-election been really working to make sure that coalition that we built of experts, advocates, leaders were ready and available and in front of all of the great folks that the president-elect and vice president-elect are appointing to lead on our issues. Because as you said it best, LGBTQ plus equality, we have a chance here to really push forward into the next chapter of equality here. And none of our issues are exist in silos, and our communities don't exist in silos. And so working to make sure that we form a holistic approach, it's been my scope of work for several months now.
Thank you so much, Reggie. I really appreciate it. I'm super excited to jump in. Tyrone, I wanted to start with you because it was your suggestion to have a moment of silence for this event, and I'm so thankful that we did. And I know many folks in the country are collectively, shaking our heads when we see how other countries are getting COVID under control, while the numbers that we have are closely, they're just ridiculous. And so what do you think our administration has to do to get a handle on this? And what are the things that you think that we need to consider?
Yes, thank you, Imani, for raising this topic. According to reports from the Human Rights Campaign and the Movement Advancement Project, we know that LGBTQ people are disproportionately impacted by the pandemic. And so we know getting a hand on this pandemic is really critical for the very survival of people in our community. We also know that this pandemic is really hurting disproportionately people of color and people living in poverty. And so, one thing that we at the LGBT Anti-Poverty Action Network are really focused on right now is making sure that we really are providing the supports that people need in this moment right now, specifically low-income people. And so it's really exciting, President-elect Biden has proposed a $1.9 trillion package to really look at the immediate needs that folks have right now, including raising the minimum wage. We know that low-income LGBT people are really struggling to get by on current wages. And so this is going to be absolutely critical. And I think it's also really to think about the people who are incarcerated. We've seen all across this country that people who are incarcerated have been heavily impacted by the pandemic. And so we know that a part of the solution is really releasing as many people back into their communities so they can be home with their families and safer. So that's also gonna be really critical in this moment. And so, NCLR and the network, we're really excited to really help move these issues forward because we know that this literally is a life and death situation for so many people in our country.
Thank you so much, Tyrone. Thank you so much for highlighting folks that are incarcerated too, when thinking about rolling out solutions and making sure that these are communities that are often overlooked. So thank you so much for naming them. So we have a new administration coming in, and President-elect Biden and Vice President-elect Harris have campaigned and promised that this will be the most LGBTQ inclusive and diverse administration in history, which is very exciting. A little bit of history: in 2012, Biden became the first national leader to public support marriage equality. So I am pretty excited to see what I hope to see some of the most LGBTQ inclusive policies. So what would you like to see the administration do to support LGBTQ people? Reggie, you might have some insight into this. So let's start with you.
Sure, and it's actually a great place to start. It's where I left off just a moment ago, which is that in order for us to really make as much progress as we want to make on LGBTQ plus equality, we need every agency, every office in the White House, every appointee that the president-elect and vice president-elect put into place to understand just how critically important it is for the well-being and into the future for LGBTQ people, that they prioritize this work as well. And I think that is I think the thing that should give people the most hope in this early going is that you have a president elect and a vice president elect who has, made it a priority to tell his whole team that when you walk into the front door, this government should be able to walk and chew gum at the same time. So while we're dealing with the crises, the economic crisis, the health crisis around COVID-19, as we think about racial equity and climate equity, that LGBTQ plus equality not only is integrated where it can under those pillars, but there is also space carved out to involve the right voices who can give the administration guidance and can carve out space for the work to get done and to be done thoroughly. So, as we think about the Equality Act and we think about rescinding the trans ban, the Bostock decision last year, as we think about ending conversion therapy and what do we do around gender markers and so forth and so on, ending the epidemic of violence against trans women, ending the HIV epidemic by 2025, that there are many conversations happening right now, on the transition side that continued on from the campaign that will continue into government, so that we're doing everything we possibly can. So, one thing I can say here today is that you have a government that's not only competent again, you have a government that's not only empathetic and one that understands all the issues that we're facing, but one that will take the time to really figure it out and figure it out well.
That's exciting. Thank you so much, Reggie. Shannon, what about you? What would you like to see this administration do to support LGBTQ people?
Well, I think more than anything, I'm excited to see an administration that recognizes LGBTQ people as equal and valued members of our society, and that sees our community as an asset and a resource for addressing some of the problems Reggie was just talking about: economic inequality, climate change, all of the issues facing our country, not as political scapegoats. And I think we're going to see that reflected in every aspect of the administration, from like policies to appointments. And I'll just say, as a transgender person, I really want to stress, I think this is really especially welcome for transgender people who've been such a target for the past 4 years and have been harmed by the outgoing administration in so many ways. And we have so much to look forward to and to benefit from an administration that, rather than like trying to foment fear and misunderstanding about transgender people, is going to be doing just the opposite. And I was so thrilled to see just this morning President-elect Biden announced that he's nominating Dr. Rachel Levine, who's a highly qualified doctor. She's a public health expert who happens to be transgender. He's nominating her to the post of Assistant Secretary, Health Secretary, and that is just so historic. And he's he's already said he's going to end the transgender military ban. I mean, these are just incredibly positive developments, and they send such a positive message, one that's so needed to transgender young people and their families, and just give me so much hope that the future is going to be brighter for transgender people, for the entire LGBT community, and for our whole country.
Love it. Well said, Shannon. Thank you so much. Julie, what about you? What things are you excited about that might come out of this administration?
Thanks, Imani. Boy, I'm getting excited just listening to what's been said so far. And, we're in this interesting place right now where we're pivoting from being in the resistance to now getting ready to be partners in progress again with the new administration, as we were when President Obama was in office. So it's amazing to think about being here as opposed to where we were, 4 years ago. So it's both looking back and trying to get rid of some of the regressive policies of the last administration and then pivoting to looking forward. So, in the reproductive health rights and justice space, there's so much to undo, just as there is in the LGBTQ space. Trump reinstated the domestic gag rule in the Title X family planning program, which forbids providers from even talking about abortion. Reinstituted the global gag rule, which does something similar for recipients of US aid abroad. And those are things that can be undone pretty quickly in the new administration. The Trump administration also really vastly expanded religious exemptions for everything from birth control to, all kinds of healthcare that our community needs. And, that's going to be a challenging area, but we'd like to see, a shift to a more equitable approach to those issues. So there's stuff we want to undo, but then we want to, go, I was going to say go on offense, but I'm going to say go proactive instead. I don't want to make it sound like it's oppositional. We do want to make sure that the Bostock decision from the Supreme Court last summer about non-discrimination protections for LGBTQ people is enforced across federal agencies. There's legislation we want to see move forward. There's the Equality Act, of course, that would codify some of those non-discrimination protections in the reproductive health rights and justice space. There are also bills that would make it harder for states to restrict abortion access and get rid of discriminatory insurance coverage restrictions that particularly harm low-income women. The other thing I'll just say is, in addition to actual policies, there's personnel, and Shannon touched on a really important example of that just a minute ago. It's not just the policies that an administration pursues, but it's also who they put in place to run our agencies. That says a lot. And, there were some really shockingly troubling appointments in the last administration. And it's not only their competence, but also who and what they represent, right? So I think, as Shannon said, today was incredibly exciting to see somebody so competent in Dr. Levine appointed to HHS. And we're going to have to really be there to support her, because as Shannon also said, this administration, it was like their brand was to go after trans people. And so, that's not going to just disappear when he leaves office. So we got to make sure that our community mobilizes to really support Dr. Levine when she has to go through her Senate confirmation hearing. So yeah, it's a moment of real excitement, and I'm looking forward to rolling up my sleeves with all of these folks here and getting to work.
Thank you so much, Julie. This is a very exciting time, and I love hearing just all the different ways that you all are doing this work and concentrating on this. There's a lot of good that can be done. Tyrone, finally, what about you? What are you most excited about?
Thank you for this question. I want to go off of what Reggie was saying around empathy. I'm just so excited to have a president who cares about other human beings again, not his own selfish gain. And I think this is actually really important. Like, in the countries such as ours, that are super diverse, empathy is so critical in terms of really understanding and loving one another. And it's really hard. I mean, I understand, why it's difficult, but it is necessary work. And I'm also really excited to work with an administration that's going to really look at low-income communities and how it can support them, because I think one undertold story of this outgoing administration has been its war against poor people. That this administration has regularly tried to make it harder for people to get their basic needs met, from food, from housing, from healthcare. Like, if there's anything that this moment has taught us, is how much, one, we need each other, and how much of these are such important things that we need as human beings in the society. And so one of the things that LGBT Anti-Poverty Action Network right now is engaged in conversation with the incoming administration about establishing a task force that will specifically look at LGBTQ poverty, because we know that it's an issue that unfortunately tends to not get highlighted in these types of conversations. And so I'm really excited about doing this work and really trying to roll back many of the efforts by, the Trump administration to hurt low-income people, because our people need help right now. People are really scared, like, about their housing and about, trying to get to one place to point B, and how transportation system is shutting down. Like, these are really like day-to-day challenges that people are really struggling with. And so just to have an administration that comes in and says, like, I see you and I care about you, and we're going to try to use the federal government to the best ability that we can to really address your needs. So that's what I'm excited about.
Thank you so much, Tyrone. And thank you so much for your commitment for making this real and thinking about actual real folks and the way, I mean, what do we have a government for if we're not taking care of our folks, So thank you so much for that. So we were thrilled to receive the Bostock decision over the summer, and that determined that LGBTQ people would be protected from employment discrimination under Title VII. But we knew then that religious exemptions would play a role in that decision, but also in some other cases that we're waiting for now as well. Julie, let's go back to you. You were just talking about this. Can you tell us about what you think we should be expecting in regards to religious freedom, and what can we do?
Thanks, Imani. Yeah, this is probably going to be one of the most challenging areas that we're going to have to be working in. And I think most importantly, or most broadly, we need to get the message out that this is going to sound probably obvious to those of us gathered here today, that not all people of faith oppose LGBTQ equality and access to reproductive health care. The so-called religious liberty message, often touted by our opponents, elevates one particular set of beliefs held by some Christians, but by no means all, and it ignores the diversity of faiths held by people in this country. In addition, those who do oppose equality for LGBTQ people are often successful in twisting the concept of discrimination to make it seem as though they're the ones being persecuted when they're asked to treat us equally, respect our marriages, treat us equally in the commercial sphere, et cetera. So I think we really need to shift that narrative, because when we do begin to move LGBTQ non-discrimination policies forward, and I'm saying when we do, not if, those with religious objections will be right there trying to get in the way. And let's be honest, we have a long list of policies around religious exemptions that we want changed. I touched on a few of them earlier, particularly in the healthcare space. So, I think one strategy that we need to think about, I guess it's a strategy, that sometimes we don't, because we've been in this sort of oppositional place, is compromise. We don't need to take an all or nothing view of religious exemptions. People of faith are the majority of folks in this country, and a lot of them do come to this, from a place of sincerity. So, we at our organization have a history of quietly working with faith communities to identify areas of common ground that we can all live with. And I think Shannon might have a little bit more to say about this in a few minutes. Maybe I'll just sort of give the example of healthcare. As I said earlier, this is where I tend to focus a lot of my attention. And I'm going to say our organization, we don't have an interest in compelling individual healthcare providers to do things that really violate their own beliefs, whether it's providing certain kinds of contraception or abortion care or transition-related care, if it truly violates their beliefs. But it's very important that patients have access to the care that they need. So what do we do about that? Well, we can allow individual providers to opt out of doing certain things, but also require that they refer patients elsewhere so that patients can actually get the care they need, and require them to give full information about options so that you can respect people's individual beliefs, but also make sure people get the care that they need. Sometimes it's hard to have those conversations about compromise because, our side might feel like, if we give away too much, then it's a slippery slope, and it's difficult to think about being denied things. But I think we have to be prepared to have a more maybe nuanced conversation about some of these issues.
Thank you so much, Julie. I appreciate that. Reggie, let's go to you. You've worked really closely with the campaign, and you have some ideas about what we can do in the administration and where our limitations are. How do you think we as people, communities, and organizations can advocate to really use a coordinated effort to ourselves to get to the results that we want to see?
Absolutely, absolutely, Imani. This is, this has been something I've been thinking about a lot because I think that this virtual campaign trail, this pandemic, and just the fact that it the pandemic as a limitation really forced us to communicate differently, to advocate differently, to be with each other differently. Has really sort of taught me. I have learned some lessons that have been on my mind a lot lately, as we move into government, which is that without coalition building, and without finding all the different voices that are missing from a particular table, and sorry for the siren in the background, um, bringing different voices to the table is just so important. And I think people understand that in a campaign, but they often don't think that that's the reality in government, that they sort of leave the work up to you and to Julie and to Shannon and a few others, who are doing advocacy work. But I'm here to say that really is going to take all of us standing at these tables and advocating and pushing messages to communities that we know we can reach, bringing messages back to the Nclr family so that they can be relayed back to folks serving in the White House, serving in different agencies that are doing the work on our behalf, is so critically important, especially as we think about trying to create an apparatus where we can fight for our priorities in government for a very long time. I think that those those go hand in hand. If we want to, and I also think that by creating and expanding these conversational tables, and these organizational tables and community tables, so that government has more people to interact with, ensures that it's a great way of ensuring that we can stay in this governing apparatus for a very long time. So I think that my advice for people are very, very simple. Stay connected to the organizations that you care about. Be willing to disseminate information that you think is important. Bring people. This is a moment that I think that while we celebrate tomorrow, people ought to realize that ought to really understand the power of their own voice in this moment. That organizations like Nclr, is wanting people to stay involved and stay activated. That when that day ends, that they don't stop doing that work. So I would just encourage everyone to stay activated, stay involved. When there are messages that you see the community rallying around, join in that effort. We are powerful as a community, as whenever we're able to speak as one voice, and know that within the administration and throughout the government, you're going to have informal roundtables and LGBTQ virtual sessions or working groups established that will be seeking the opinions from people around the community. So I know that this administration is really, really excited to be working with Nclr and other organizations in the community to bring those conversations front and center in front of people, so that when there is a conversation around the Equality Act, or around HIV policy, or around other issues that are important to LGBTQ plus people, racial equity, being one of them, that that know that you're invited to that table, know that we want you there, know that this is a new day, and we'll get there together.
Reggie, thank you so much. This is a really exciting time, y'all. I am really just enjoying hearing you all speak. So thank you so much. Tyrone, I want to ask you a question, but I saw that a question came in from the audience and related to what you were talking about. And so if you could talk briefly, I'm going to ask you two questions. So briefly, if you could talk about, the question is universal basic income an issue you would consider supporting as a consider supporting it as a basic means of addressing the hardship, not only for our community, but for others. So I'm wondering if you could answer that, but then briefly, but I also wanted to move into, we're in a particular time right now where there's a collective agreement that we want to unite our country, but we can't get there without accountability. So I also want you to answer, what do you think accountability looks like in this moment? And I think there's probably some connection here. And how do you think we can get there?
Yes, that's a great question from the audience. So I think that universal basic income is one great idea that's out there to think creatively about how do we make sure that people's basic needs are met. And so that's the type of thinking that we really need. I know that one issue that has come up is that there has been some concern that UBI could replace our current social safety net. And so we need to make sure that people in the end come out better than worse, whatever policies we are choosing. So it is something that's really important for us to think about. And also, I think there's a role for the federal government to really enable states to try it out, because I know there are pilot programs happening with UBI in different parts of the country. So I think that's another great option, but I think it's something, a part of a larger conversation about how to making sure that people's basic needs are met. On the accountability piece, I think this is a really important and difficult question, and so I'm going to do my best to answer it. I think that one important piece of accountability is recognizing harm. That this administration has spent the last 4 years causing an immense amount of harm in our communities. And that we need to make sure that this government, both Congress and the incoming White House, really sheds a light on the harms that have been done. And so we need to recognize that, because people need to see that the harm that they experience is being recognized. So I think that's really important. So that's going to take, congressional investigations and hearings. I think it's also really important that we're going to have to hold individuals accountable. And what that looks like, I think there's a larger conversation about that. But we know, for example, top DHS officials knew that the family separate, or the issue at the border with separating families, they knew that families were going to be separated. This is a trauma that these families are probably going to have to deal with for the rest of their lives. And so individuals who actively sought to hurt communities need to be held accountable. And again, it may not be the criminal legal system, may be the appropriate place for that, but there needs to be an accounting happen there. I think also we really need to really focus and prioritize policies and other efforts to really help bring restitution to communities that have been hurt. So looking at our immigration system, and I'm really excited, one of the main priorities in the first days of the Biden administration is around immigration reform, because we've seen how destructive our immigration system is and how much fear and violence that it enacts in our communities. I think also it's really important too, when we think about accountability, we did not use this as a reason to build, to add more policing in our communities and to expand the military. Because we already know these institutions enact violence, not only in our communities domestically, but also internationally. And so we need to, and also the amount of funding that it takes to prop up, militarism around the world, and also police in our community, is taking from investments that can be going to our communities. So I'm back to the point around, housing, food, transportation, healthcare. These are the things that people are dealing with on a day-to-day basis. And so we need to make sure that we are not being distracted. So I think those are some really important ways that we can really, really look at accountability, but it's also, while also holding our other values that we have.
Thank you so much, Tyrone. I appreciate it. Shannon, I want to ask you a similar question. Under your leadership your leadership and vision as the legal director at Nclr, we've seen some bridge building work that has really allowed us to make some incredible inroads. And I'm wondering, what do you think is possible if we're able to get to this accountability and we're able to work with different groups and communities? What do you think is possible?
Yeah, so much. Julie, I really appreciate your really thoughtful comments and perspective about the very fraught topic of religious exemptions. And Tyrone, what you were just saying about the need for accountability and honesty and for us just to come together as a country and just look honestly at the problems that are facing us. I was just rereading this speech that President Obama gave in 2006, even before he was elected president, about what he called the need to tackle, quote, head on the mutual suspicion that sometimes exists between religious America and secular America. I was just thinking, that suspicion, of course, has just been really apparent in the cultural and political conflicts between conservative faith communities and faith leaders on the one hand, and then LGBTQ people and our allies on the other. And it's just been one of the most painful and destructive aspects of our national politics in the past few decades, really, but particularly in the past 4 years, because we saw the outgoing administration ally itself with like the most extreme anti-LGBTQ religious groups, and just doing everything it could to foment discord and division. And I think it's because of that, it's been so easy for us, I think, to forget that there are so many conservative religious people who have LGBTQ family members and friends who are willing to support legal equality for our community, but they do want protections for religious liberty, but are open to dialogue and reason. And if we just building those bridges is just absolutely critical to everything we need to do, including passing the Equality Act, but so much more. And I mean, Imani, that one of the most important, I think, and successful programs and surprising ones that we've had at Nclr is a project called Common Ground. We co-sponsor it with the NCAA, and every year through that program, we bring together LGBTQ athletes and advocates together with coaching staff, athletic directors, other staff from very conservative colleges and universities, and bring everyone together with the goal of creating more mutual understanding and support, and particularly to talk about how those schools can do a better job of supporting their LGBTQ student athletes. And this program includes some of the most conservative schools in the country. I mean, from BYU to Wheaton College. And it's just been transformative for changing the climate for the students at those schools. And it's been the most transformative experience I've ever had as an LGBTQ advocate. And that's given me so much hope, and it's shown me how much progress we absolutely can make if we will just have the courage and the creativity and the hopefulness to reach across those lines.
Thank you so much, Shannon. I really appreciate that. So one of the pitfalls that we've seen is that we've gotten stuck wondering if we're fighting and we have enough support for LGBTQ issues. Reggie, do you think that this is a legitimate consideration we should have, or what do you think is best for our movement right now? I'm not sure if that was super clear, but what I'm asking is, so often we get caught up wondering if enough people will support LGBTQ people and the issues that relate to us. And so I'm wondering, do you think that that's something that we have to consider?
Yeah, and as you were talking, it reminded me a little bit about what Tyrone was talking about a moment ago, which is the trauma that is often associated with being a member of our community. I mean, I think that we stand on the shoulders of giants, of folks who have trailblazed for us and have fought for equality when it was tough, when no one was listening, when it was very easy for institutions to discriminate and to not feel sorry about it. And I think what happens and what has happened is that because we made so much progress based on the fact that those trailblazers, so many of them are incredible leaders and have led us to this moment. What comes with that is sometimes a hesitance to really lean in on the moment and to really fight for full justice and equality for all members of our community. I think that moment has passed, and I think that. And I'm proud to say that, and I'm excited about the moment we're in. I think that if you look at any LGBTQ issue, you look at the breakdown across different communities, even even in communities that you wouldn't think would be supportive, you've seen an uptick in support for LGBTQ equality across the board. And that's the place that we all ought to start. And we also ought to operate with the knowledge, the reality, and I keep using my hands a lot today because everybody's saying things I get excited about. Shannon started it off, so apologies if I get too animated in this box. Which is that our community, we're everywhere. LGBTQ plus people are in every community. We care about every issue, and not only that, there's a critical mass of us everywhere. So for the movement, over the next 4 years, I think will be really, really critically important as we talk about some of these hot button issues as they relate to our community, that we don't hesitate to push back against any criticism that's thrown our way. And we can do that thoughtfully. I mean, I think Julie said it best when she was talking about religious liberty, is that there are LGBTQ people of faith who are ready to speak out as to why fighting for the Equality Act is just as important as protecting, the ways in which they worship, and I think that when the American people can hear those voices in particular, and can start to see the intersection of our community and like the fact that we are just as, involved in these conversations as they are and have thought about the ways to unite us and to bring us together, that we will change even more hearts and minds. And I know that we're going to do that from the government's, from the administration's perspective, and bring those voices in so that we're doing our part. But for the movement, nothing beats a movement that is on fire for getting these issues out in front of folks. And for the Nclr family and for all the organizations that work with Nclr and anyone listening, this is our time. You think about how many years we've been fighting to pass the Equality Act, 46, right? And here's our best shot at getting it through and signing the law. There's no time for hesitance here, and I would just it's something I used to talk about all the time on the campaign, from our friend Yemi Adebomire, who talks about leaning into your queerness. Lean into your queerness. This is whether it's your professional, in your professional role or in your community role. Here's our chance to really sort of fight forward and don't leave anyone behind. All of our community, from LGBTQ plus youth to trans women of color, to people who are marginalized, who might be faced with dealing with this pandemic in particular, in worse ways than maybe some of us have. Fight for everyone, because you're going to find a whole community of people in which that resonates.
Thank you so much, Reggie. That's so important when we fight for the folks that are experiencing the most marginalization, that we're all better for that. So thank you so much for that. I wanted to say we are, there was a question from the audience, and Julie, I'm wondering if you can speak to this. I think it actually kind of fits here. So the question is there any, is the idea that we'll have to compromise on religious exemptions based on the fact that they will likely be upheld by the new Supreme Court? And if so, should that test be, quote, sincerely held religious beliefs, or something else that uses a reasonableness test? And so I want you to think about that. If you could add something here, but I also wanted to ask you about the courts. We're looking at an administration that has promised to be the most LGBTQ friendly administration we've ever had, and that's really exciting. But there's still a lot that needs to be undone, and we have to start thinking about the courts. What do you think about judicial appointments and thinking about the courts more broadly? And if you wouldn't mind adding both of those things in, I'd appreciate it.
Sure, happy to. Let me start just with the courts generally, because I think it might then tee up the question from the person from the audience. So just to sort of put this in context, as we sit here today, President Trump has appointed about a little over a quarter of all sitting federal judges. That's huge. And remember, these are lifetime appointments. And I think according to a report that Lambda Legal put out, about 40% of those folks had a history of hostility toward LGBTQ people when they were confirmed. So we have a federal bench that is not necessarily a friendly place for us, depending on where we are in the country. We really need progressive to take the judiciary as seriously as conservatives have been doing for a very, very long time. I mean, let's be honest, filling the federal courts with conservatives with these lifetime appointments was a key reason why a lot of Republicans held their noses and tolerated Donald Trump, even if they didn't like a lot of other things about him. It was a means to an end for them to get these folks in place. And also, it's not just the Supreme Court that we have to think about. We tend to all get ginned up when there's a Supreme Court vacancy for good reason, but the lower courts matter as much, if not more, because that's where most cases are resolved. Most cases don't get to the Supreme Court, so it really does matter who's sitting on the federal bench at the district court and the appellate level. We need more diversity on the bench. And by that, I mean not just demographic diversity, which is hugely important. I mean, the federal bench should look like the country, but also experiential diversity. We need more folks who were public defenders, who were civil rights attorneys like us, legal aid attorneys, not just big law firm lawyers, prosecutors, and people who went to Harvard Law School. The good sign so far is that the incoming administration gets this and believes this. Incoming White House counsel Dana Remus sent a letter to Senate Democrats in December saying, judges are a priority, send us names. And we want that diversity. We want professional as well as demographic diversity. And they specifically said LGBTQ nominees. So that's important. And to anybody out there who either is a lawyer or knows great lawyers, like, we shouldn't be shy about stepping up and trying to get some of those nominations. The Republicans, honestly, were just unabashed about putting in really young people, and sometimes people who were just flat out unqualified for seats, because all that they cared about was that they were young and they were going to be there for a very long time. I'm not suggesting we should put unqualified people forward, but we should not be shy about putting our names into the pipeline, not necessarily the people on this call, but people in our community who are good. So just to pivot to then the question that came in about compromising on religious exemptions. I mean, part of it is, yes, we have to acknowledge the reality of the courts, but part of it is because, honestly, it's the right thing to do. We live in a pluralistic country, so it's not about winning and getting our policy in place no matter what other people feel. That's not really it's not the goal. We need to give, due deference to people of faith who sometimes struggle with these issues. And a lot of things won't go to the Supreme Court. So it's not just about the Supreme Court composition. As I said before, the lower courts matter too. The final part of the question about the appropriate test, it's a little hard to say. It depends on the issue, whether it's federal or state. Are we talking about the First Amendment? Are we talking about the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, which is sort of a statutory companion bill to the First Amendment? I think what I would just say generally is that what I would like to see when courts take up these issues of religious exemptions and trying to balance interests is that they really give more credence to the notion of third-party harm. As I said earlier, this notion that the people who want the exemptions are the ones being discriminated against, I think we need to kind of turn that narrative around a little bit and hope that courts will look a little bit more about the harm to third parties. So, I think about the famous Hobby Lobby case where they said, oh, well, we really wouldn't want to make an employer have to cover birth control because it's against their religious beliefs, the family who owned the company, but there was virtually nothing said about the employees who wouldn't get access to those services. So I think we just need to kind of make sure that we're thinking about everybody affected in the final outcome.
Thank you so much, Julie. That's amazing. I learned so much just right there. Thank you. Thanks for sharing that. We're coming to the end of our time, so this is going to be our last question before we end. But Shannon, I wanted to ask you a question about young people. Right now, we know that we've been able to make a lot of progress in working to end conversion therapy for young people, which is huge. What do you think is possible in this new administration, and what do you think that we should be thinking about for young folks?
Yeah, so Nclr has put like an enormous amount of time and energy into this issue, into our Born Perfect campaign to end conversion therapy, and more broadly to build family acceptance and support for LGBTQ young people. And it's just been incredibly successful. And I think that is in great part because it has been a bipartisan campaign. So in the last 8 years since California passed the first law protecting minors from conversion therapy, we're now up to 20 states, 85 localities. That's stunning. Nearly all of them were passed with bipartisan support. Almost half of them were signed by Republican governors. We're just so thrilled that President-elect Biden and Vice President-elect Harris have already voiced their strong support for this issue. There's so much we're going to be able to do around stopping conversion therapy, but much more broadly around encouraging family support for LGBTQ young people in racially and religiously diverse families and communities. And it's going to be really the first time that we have a presidential administration that recognizes the critical importance of providing resources to those families, which honestly we haven't even been that great about as a movement. So this is going to be, I think, just revolutionary. And it's just amazing to have such great partners in the incoming administration for that truly life-saving work.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much to all of our panelists. In closing, I'd like you all to just leave us with something that if the participants could take away one thing from this discussion, and we didn't get to spend as much time as I would have hoped. So even if you want to introduce a new thought, please share with us what you'd like the audience to take with them. Reggie, we're going to start with you.
Thank you so much, Imani. I really so thankful and grateful that you included me in today's conversation, and just wishing the entire NCLR family a happy inauguration tomorrow, and I hope that as you're watching the festivities that you I'm a contemplative person, so hopefully that you spend tomorrow really thinking through what it means to be an American in this moment. I'm big on marking occasions as well, and I think it's so important based on the last 4 years that we went through together, that we spend a moment just either virtually with a group of people or even just by ourselves, really thinking through what is your role over the next 4 years. How can you give back to the country that we all know, that we all love? Really kind of remembering back to President Kennedy's "Ask not what you can do for your country, no, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country." This is our moment to answer that call, based on all the myriad of crises that we are facing. And I'll just end with, I am also glad that we took a moment of silence to remember the 400,000 Americans that we've lost to COVID-19, because may their memories guide us forward, and of course 2020 won't be a year that none of us will forget quickly, but that the spirit of all the things that they fought for, and especially members of our own community, Larry Kramer, Lorena Borojas, Amy Stevens, that we all lost in this past year, that we remember them, Monica Roberts, that we remember them, and that we remember their resiliency as people, as leaders, and that it informs our own resiliency in this moment, that we dig a little bit deeper when we have to, when the fights get tough and people are now on the same page, or maybe the unspeakable amount of hate that we often face as LGBTQ people is thrown back at us, or it's familiar, it comes back to us in familiar terms, that we remember that we're a lot stronger than that, and that we'll get through this together. So thank you again, and happy inauguration.
Thank you so much, Reggie. Really appreciate it. Julie, what about you? If folks could take away one thing, what would you like them to take away?
I guess, boy, that's a tough act to follow, Reggie. That was inspiring. I guess I would say be excited and patient at the same time. And it may seem like kind of an odd thing to say after we've checked off all the things we want to get done. But, it's very possible that we won't see an LGBTQ specific thing immediately. But whatever this administration does to address COVID, to get the economy back on track, addressing systemic racism, addressing climate change, and that's some great timing on the part of my dog. I apologize about that. These are all LGBTQ issues, and we all benefit. As was said earlier, we don't live in some silo over here. We're part of the broader American family, and we are going to benefit from these policies. So it may, again, be that we don't see the thing that's on our transition to do, wish list immediately, but that's okay. We have to be patient, and we will be lifted up by all of the things that this administration does. I kind of want to just steal what Tyrone said earlier about just being so grateful to be welcoming an administration that actually cares about not just us, but people in general. That's just going to be such a refreshing thing. So let's enjoy that. Thanks so much for letting me be part of this today.
Thank you so much, Julie. Tyrone, if you could leave us with one final thought.
Yeah, the work is just beginning. I think honestly, this past, everything's up leading to the moment is like half the struggle, and that we really do need you all to really fight for all these things that we care about, and to make sure that none of our people are being left behind. And also, I think, there's a lot of work that we need to do internally within ourselves. I think that, this country has been really wrestling some, particularly around like racism, anti-Blackness. And just because Trump is leaving the White House doesn't mean those issues are gone. And so like, we're going to have to continue doing that. And it's really going to take empathy, self-compassion, vulnerability, love, and just downright commitment, and to really be there for one another. And I'm just really excited to work with the incoming administration, with you all who joined us today, my colleagues who are speaking today. I think, we are the ones to make it happen. And so I really hope that you all stay committed and don't feel that, now that, Biden's walking into the White House tomorrow, that the work is done, because, as I said, it's just beginning. So thanks again for joining us, and I look forward to working with you. And also, don't forget to follow the Fight LGBTQ Poverty hashtag on Twitter. Yeah, hope you can join us for that too.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Tyrone. And Shannon, please, last thoughts.
Just what everyone said. Now's our time to contribute and participate, and we should be thinking not so much as what can the administration do for us, but how can we step up and help address the very serious issues facing our country and make sure no one is left behind.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, everyone, and thank you for joining us. We didn't get to answer all of the questions here, but I also want to name that something that is very important at Nclr is intersectional issues and looking at this. And one of the things that came up and kind of ties into a couple of things is talking about the lip service that we heard for a lot of folks talking about do Black Lives Matter, and there were a lot of commitments making to Black LGBTQ people and LGBTQ people of color, and seeing how people follow through. And so when we're starting to look about accountability, that is going to be something, and this country really does have to have a reckoning around racism. And that is something that very much came up, and something that has been a priority of ours and will continue to be a priority of ours. We can't get to equality if we're still dealing with other forms of oppression like racism. And so we don't see a difference. We don't see a difference between LGBTQ equality and racial justice, and getting to equality there as well, because we know that many of us experience racism and heterosexism and sexism and transphobia, and these things aren't different. This is all part of our movement. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here, for being part of this discussion. Thank you so much to our amazing panelists. It's been such an honor to share space with you all. If you want to find out more about the work that we're doing at Nclr, you can reach us at nclrights.org, and you can find out some of the work that anything that we're working on. But also, we have a hotline, and so if there are any questions that you have around anything, if you need support, you can go and you can come to our hotline. There's a number, there's an email address. You can talk to us on Twitter. We would love to answer any of the questions that you have. Thank you so much, everyone, and have a great start to your week. Take care.